Hello, friends. It's Clint. Welcome to Sweetcast. This is the latest Whisper Network article. It's come out, and I want to go through this. These articles are always interesting because usually it seems like there's a lot of lead up and very little like that we don't already know. And sometimes, I'll be honest, stuff that it's basically just confirming what we already knew. In this case, this is actually, I think, perhaps the most interesting Whisper Network article because it's talking about our reaction. And I suspect that there are starting they're starting to be very quiet, very slow, very minute movement by companies, corporations, public education, probably a number of places that are infested with ideologues to improve things just a little bit. And so while this is, I think, like leading to ultimately a good thing, I suspect it's actually going to cause a lot of pushback in the other direction. There's going to be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. So I'm going to go through this. Before we get into it, though, I did it again. I took a weekend off of making videos mainly out of necessity. I was just so busy this weekend. But yeah, there's definitely a strong correlation here. If there's ever an experiment, this is it. We had a fantastic week last week. We ended up at 28,600. Still 10 days left in the main 30-day campaign. And we're 3 backers away from 500 backers, which is a huge landmark to get to. And so if you haven't backed it, check it out. Really, really good comic book. I'm really excited for people to read this. I think you're going to love it. Beyond that, though, spread the word. If you don't have a t-shirt yet, pick up a t-shirt, because things like t-shirts, trading cards, I'm already working these things out to get them printed. I'm guessing on a few things. But the t-shirts are one that I need a fairly exact count on those. So I'm really curious to see how it ends up. But if you've backed it, you don't have a t-shirt yet, pick up a t-shirt. Price is just the same if you back it again. All right. So Whisper Network article. Here's the headline here. It reads, exclusive: Whisper Network members starting to suffer the consequences. Uh-oh. Well, let's see here. So it's going to actually go back in time, and I'm going to skip a bit of this because we've talked about this here on the channel. I'm going to fill you in a very broad sense. Okay. Essentially, there's a comic book pro named Bill Willingham. Okay. He's been around a long time. Fable's creator, in fact, Bill Willingham. He hired an assistant. This is all public information. It's right here. We've talked about it again. Stephanie Cook was his assistant. Bill Willingham alleged that Stephanie Cook embezzled money from him in the amount to about $10,000, which is a lot of money. It's an awful lot of money. That's fraud. There's actually an incident report filed with the police. So this has been absolutely filed. It's a public record, and it has been well known throughout the comic book industry for a number of years. Only recently has it been brought up, I guess, a bit more. It's been, the public consciousness, and people are asking about it. Why is that? That's because Stephanie Cook lives in Canada, not in the United States, and is out of jurisdiction, I guess, for this to happen. I don't know how. I mean, if to me, fraud, you could get extradited for something like that. I'm not a lawyer or anything, but she's also continuing to work in comics, and so that presents questions. How else do I say that? That presents opportunities for people to ask questions. So especially when a news site goes over and tries to give, big glowing articles, human interest pieces, and interviews with Stephanie Cook. At the same time, people are going to ask questions because they know that Bill Willingham allegedly is the victim of fraud at the hands of his assistant. So this, clearly there are going to be questions asked about it. Okay. So why does this come up again? Because there has been some motion, apparently. There are several news sites that are trying to have their cake and eat it too. On one hand, they want to get free comic books from big publishers like DC and Marvel. They want to be able to review those comic books and say glowing, nice things in their articles, so that potentially, if you're working for that news outlet, someday you might be able to get hired to be an editor for one of these comic book publishers. This is no secret. Everyone knows this. You can go a long way in comics by butt kissing, essentially. At the same time, the way that comics works is you have your posse, okay? And it's almost like everyone has these little fiefdoms in comics. And I can understand it. I have people that I work with in comics that I trust, I respect, I admire. I know that they can get stuff done. And so I'm incentivized to work with those same people over and over again and keep my circle just small enough that nothing crazy happens, right? Nobody tries to monkey wrench my publishing career, my comics career. At the same time, this kind of mentality is terrible for the comic book industry in that once you have one kind of, what would you call it? It's almost like a regime. Can we say a regime? You have a leader of regime that's in power, comics regime, and they're only going to hire their friends, okay? Or anybody that butt kisses them appropriately, that's on the right side of the regime. If you're not on the right side of that regime, they will find ways to make your life difficult. And part of the way they do that is to use the comics media. This is absolute corruption. And I think it's worse because the comic book industry is so small. It absolutely happens. It's not the exception to the rule. This is the rule. The exception to the rule are news sources and outlets and articles and journalists that are unbiased. Those are so few and far between that if I spot one, I will let you know. For the most part, there is absolutely a motive behind it. That's the way that this business works. Unfortunately, it's just the way that it works. So, for example, here, the article brings up here that with this particular article came out about Bill Willingham and all of the problems with Stephanie Cook allegedly embezzling and defrauding Bill Willingham out of money. Bleeding Cool reported on it. That article has since been removed. It no longer exists. Well, that's interesting. The other thing is that there apparently the publishers are wising up to what is going on in comics media. And when they know that comics media is used as a weapon to sometimes target their employees, the same news outlets, the same reporters that want to get on your good side, Marvel and DC, are the same ones that will smear your creators so that they can essentially get canceled from the industry, and it'll open up new doorways. This is the way it works. Publishers seem to be wising up to this, at least at DC Comics. Therefore, DC Comics, according to this article, is allegedly closing the door on some of these news outlets. So here's one example too. Rich Johnston is confirming what these anonymous sources have been telling Bleeding Fool here. Not to be confused with Bleeding Cool. So here's Rich Johnston of Bleeding Cool. Again, another one of those journalists that will sink to pretty deep lows to smear a creator he's not interested in working in the comics. He says, Bleeding Cool, naturally, doesn't get review copies of DC Comics titles, but I understand that some smaller sites or channels, not all, are saying they've been dropped from access this week. Is that you? Getting dropped from access because you're not reviewing comics. You're using your place as a bargaining tool. So that sort of confirms what Bleeding Fool was saying about DC wising up to this. All right. He does say, I can confirm then that in Q1 of 2020, that's just early this year, several comic publishers hired investigators. They actually hired private investigators who are diving deep into media corruption that is damaging their brand, both reputationally and financially. And it looks like we're already seeing results. I've got so many questions here, more questions than answered. First off, we got to stop here for a moment. If DC Comics is hiring private investigators to look into news outlets that are damaging their brand, that must mean that DC Comics is suddenly concerned about their brand. They need to find out who's smearing their name. And if it's news publications that they've been giving free comic books to and pats on the back and convention access and things like that, why on earth are they doing favors to these news outlets, right? Media outlets. The problem that they're facing goes far beyond just this one aspect of media corruption in the comic book industry. uh it's crazy that now they're getting to it, but this almost to me seems like some post-mortem work that they're doing to hire private investigators to find out what's going on. Yeah, this is the comic book industry. This is crazy. All right, so there are also ongoing discussions of pulling press credentials from the Whisper Network's journalists so they don't get passes to major conventions like San Diego Comic-Con and New York Comic-Con. This is coming at the request of a number of high-level writers and artists. Who are these high-level writers and artists? Wow, that's a great question. You can be an established comic book pro and get dethroned. You can get removed. You can get canceled if news media in journalism can make you look bad enough to the company. They'll fire you. This happens frequently. I think it was really 2019, as far as I'm concerned, was the worst year for that. 2020, nobody was doing much of anything because it was pencils down. But I remember 2019, man, it seemed like any little thing, people were on a hair trigger. Okay, so you want to keep their distance from some of the most dangerous members of the network. They will wield their power to get you removed. So let's see, we'll continue here. And now, since Heidi's hit piece dropped, there is suddenly talk of giving interview access and exclusives only to trusted, approved A-list sources, and barring contact with D and F-list sites that continue to employ social terrorists. I've been told that many of these investigations are targeting specific members of the network. Okay, so in the network, he means the Whisper network of people, right? Who are, I think that activism, political activism, is actually more of a front. It's more of a justification for the Whisper Network to do what they do. Honestly, at the end of the day, I really believe that it's a king of the hill game. Everybody wants to be working in comic books. Everybody wants to be working for the big two, and they will do anything to get you out of the way so they can get up there. So if they can use ideology as a tool to get there, they absolutely will. Social terrorist is also a good way to describe what it is that they're doing. So who is on the way out? These are people essentially that are becoming blacklisted. They're being blacklisted by the industry because of their attempt to blacklist others. This is a reaction. This is, some would say, justice. Some sites like Bleeding Cool are irredeemable thanks to Rich Johnson's past and reputation for social terrorism. So he was blacklisted long ago. But it looks like even the Hollywood Reporter has started to clean house when it comes to Whisper Network insiders. All right. Let's see. Here we go. Here's more confirmation from the public of what's going on. As they say, some personal news. Today's my last day as a regular at THR's Heat Vision. I'm going to very much miss it. And the plan is that I'll still be contributing in the future in some form, but I'm not entirely gone, and the opportunities it afforded me for so long. And if we continue on down here, where we go. Apparently, journalists, in quotes, is going around trying to contact my targets to see if they want to take legal action against me because I'm harassing and bullying people like Jay Lee and Kate Leith. I don't know how to say her last name. So that's a fun way to slide into the weekend. It's amazing to me that this is so public on Twitter. They have been hiring investigators to look into people that you have been targeting as a journalist. A journalist that is using activism as your essentially your premise and your justification for your actions in hopes that you will someday find a place for you in the comic book industry while it is friendly to your ideology. Fascinating. So like I got to stop here for a moment. If you're somebody that thinks that you have to be a left-wing ideologue to get ahead, whether no matter where you work, you're going to be incentivized to try and be more extreme in that direction because those are the rules of the game. All it takes are for publishers to deny these rules of the game. Don't allow them to make those the rules for how it works. And I think you'd be surprised at how many people suddenly become moderate in their viewpoints because the goal is for them to work in comics, right? You have some people that are obsessed with this ideology and they'll do anything to get it to get what they want as far as their ideology goes. But I really believe that a lot of people are doing it because they think it'll get them points. They think it'll get them ahead. They think it'll get them a job. Let's continue on here. The next tweet for this Caitlin Rosenberg. Remember the time this white supremacist tried and failed to be a politician, so he started making comics about Nazis? Why is he back? Who is this about? Oh, Nick Spencer at the helm. Oh, okay, all right. So again, those kinds of extremist comments to try and just it's crazy. In addition to her bizarre personal attacks against Nick Spencer, her support of bullying and harassment against Jay Lee and her disturbed obsession with Kate Leith, also, she's also been going after bestseller John Green. All right, so it's just more tweets of going after people like Dan Slott as well, which is kind of hilarious. So the reason it's hilarious is because Dan Slott is one of those people that is very important to Marvel Comics that sets the pace. He sets the tone. He has signaled out to the world that left-wing ideology is very important to Marvel Comics, and your chances of working there are going to be a lot higher if you are as extreme as he is. So the natural response is for people to be even more extreme than he is. That's funny, though, because that puts a target on Dan Slott's back. This is when Marvel and DC will finally do something about it because they realize there is no end to people they will target. They're here to overthrow the entire regime so that they can replace it. And I'm afraid it's too late. That's the thing here. It's too late. But at least there's investigators looking around, so we can do some post-mortem here. All right, the bottom line. Let's read this. Investigations are continuing. Legal consequences are no doubt looming, and more firings / resignations are certainly on the way. The AV Club, Newsarama, CBR, The Hollywood Reporter, and other such outlets are going to have to choose between keeping unstable, vindictive social terrorists and corrupt Whisper Network journalists on board, or simply letting them go so they can repair their brand's image and maintain a good standing within the industry. This is an interesting summer to watch and see if there's an improvement in behavior from the usual suspects, or if they decide to double down after seeing publishers pulling review copies, creators and events limiting access to only approved outlets, and multiple internal investigations into damping accusations and accusations. The backlash has officially begun. And one thing I'm now certain of, the changes are coming. They are coming. I do honestly believe that this is all going down. So it'll be interesting to see. I suspect there's going to be a lot of PR going on. And, you know, what you'd want to see is from a news outlet that wants to repair their reputation, you would expect them to express some kind of public commitment to being impartial and being a news site and, being fair. That's what you would expect from a company that's trying to repair their reputation. However, if they do that, if they come out and publicly say something like that, they're going to receive, backlash from SJWs. I don't know how else to say it. That's what is going to happen. So what are they going to do? They're going to be quiet. They're going to make very small movements, let people go. They're going to try and maintain, plausible deniability with anything that they do. That's what they're going to try and do. At the end of the day, I think it's too little too late, but we will find out. I really hope that this leads to some serious swamp draining in the comic book industry and in comics journalism. But I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below. I'd appreciate it. What do you think about this Whisper Network article? I realize it was kind of a long video, but I think there's a lot of context here and stuff to explain. So we will see. Don't forget to back Downcast 3 now on Indiegogo. Links in the description below, and I'll see you in the next video.